yeah, I find it really helpful for people to be able to learn from the questions that others have, because oftentimes you're not the only one with that question. So the first question is, my postgraduate work permit is expiring next month, and I'm planning to extend it under passport expiry since it was originally supposed to expire in July instead of May. Meanwhile, are there other things I should look into or focus to get PR? Okay, I'll approach this in a couple of ways. So first of all, what I understand to be true, Shreya, feel free to come off mute if I've got this not quite right. But when you applied for your postgraduate work permit, let's assume you were eligible for a 3-year PGWP. If your passport was valid for a shorter period of time, then IRCC only issues the work permit as long as your passport's valid. So in that case, yes, you can apply for an extension to, assuming that you have now secured a new passport, then you can apply for that extra duration that you missed out on because IRCC cut it off at the passport expiry. Generally, postgraduate work permits are not a permit that you can extend because it's a one-time permit. But in this case, because you were eligible for a certain duration and didn't get it due to a passport expiry, yes, you can extend. So then the next question, are there other things I should look into or focus to get PR? Again, Shreya, if you have if you have more specific questions, happy for you to come off mute or type them in the chat, but I'll take it from, you know, I'll kind of just go from what I think you're asking is, you know, how can you prepare for PR? So what I describe as this approach is, first, you have your opportunity scan. You have to identify the programs that might fit your situation. And that could be the federal express entry programs, could be provincial nominee programs. There's a TR to PR that I'm sure everyone has heard of, that we are waiting for details of that temporary program to be announced. They're expected this month. So just kind of doing an opportunity scan and identifying, okay, what might be possible? There are over 120 different pathways to permanent residency when you include all of the streams within all of the provincial nominee programs, in addition to the federal program. So it can take some time. There are some assessment tools and other tools to help you kind of through this opportunity scan. You can find them in the Navio HQ. Which again, if you haven't accessed it already, you will find Navio HQ on our website, navioimmigration.com, and it's the free tools button at the top. So you'll find in there some tools and just like assessment questionnaires that will help you in identifying opportunities. And then the next stage is, once opportunities are identified, is to narrow those down by evaluating your eligibility for each of the programs, as well as your likelihood of success. And so to put that into context, you might be someone who qualifies in the Canadian Experience class. That's an application submitted through the Express Entry system. So on the surface, it might look like, great, I have my year of Canadian experience and I passed a language test, I'm good. But you have to take it a step further and look at the viability of that strategy. So that, in the case of Express Entry, requires you to assess your Express Entry rank. So calculate your CRS score and then compare that against the minimum score required to get an invitation to apply in the most recent rounds of invitation. We never know in advance what the score will be, like what the cutoff threshold will be for a round of invitation in the future. And so the way we evaluate and assess eligibility is by calculating your score now and comparing it to the historical data, like the most recent rounds of invitation. So that's what I would do. Same for provincial nominee programs. Some provincial nominee programs have that invitation mechanism, like that gating mechanism built in, like BC does, for example, Ontario does. So looking at the provinces for the same thing, what streams within the provincial nominee programs might suit your situation and your profile. And then once you determine that, what's the application process, and are there any gates that you would have to get through, and then how likely is it that you would be successful, whether it's calculating your score in the provincial nominee program, and again doing the same exercise of looking at the most recent rounds. With the provincial nominee programs, it does get interesting. For example, in Ontario, not only do they invite applicants with a certain score and above, but they also segment candidates and invite people based on the location and occupation. So those are things you have to look into when you're evaluating the viability of an opportunity or a program. And then aside from that, making sure you have your documents ready. I just had this conversation actually earlier today. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we are expecting IRCC to announce the details of what everyone is calling the TR to PR pathway. It actually doesn't have a name yet, but let's just roll with that. It's a temporary program that IRCC announced they would launch when they released the immigration levels plan back in November last year. And they said, in addition to the 390,000 new permanent residents that were budgeted for in the immigration levels plan, IRCC also said that there will be an additional 33,000 new permanent residents admitted through a temporary program that will run from 2026 to 2027. So we're all waiting for that. There aren't any concrete details other than the period that the program will run, which is this year and next, and the number of people that are expected to transition from temporary residents in Canada to permanent residents. Again, that's 33,000. I bring this up because the question was, what should I focus on or look into? And one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give is make sure you have your documents ready. Have your language test up to date. Have your education credential assessment. Start gathering, if you haven't already, start gathering proof of your work experience both in and outside Canada, and just be on top of having your document package ready. A lot of these documents are transferable to different programs, like the language test and the education assessment. Like there's a set of language tests, CELPIP, IELTS, TEF, TCF, that are acceptable across all the programs. Same with the education credential assessment. So if you invest in getting those documents now, there's a high chance that no matter what pathway you move forward with, those documents will be applicable. And the reason I'm stressing this is because there's been one other program, like a TR to PR program, that it was 2022 or 2023. Can't remember now because the pandemic years are kind of just all collapsed into that pandemic time. But when that program was announced, people missed out because they didn't have these documents in place. They didn't have their language test specifically. And when IRCC announced the details of the TR to PR pathway, everyone went to book their language test, and all the testing centers got overwhelmed and booked out. And so people missed because they literally couldn't get their booked into a language test before the program opened and filled super quickly. So it's incredibly beneficial to build your core PR document package ahead of time, and then make sure if you're eligible, throw in a valid get a valid express entry profile submitted. Whatever province you're in, submit your expression of interest if you qualify for one of the streams, because if your hat isn't in the ring, you're not in the game at all. And once you have your test results and your education assessment, that's the investment that it takes just to get the profiles created. So even if it's unlikely that you'll get invited through express entry, let's say, if your score is not competitive enough at the moment, still put your profile in, because if you already have those documents, it's no harm done. And we've seen one time in the past where the minimum score for express entry dropped to 75. Hasn't happened since. No idea if it will happen again, but just for context, anything can happen. So just make sure you have all the irons in the fire that you possibly can. So I hope that answers the question. If not, feel free to add any clarifying questions in the chat. And from there, I will move on to Juan.
Hi.
Hey, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Shreya. Juan, I'm going to ask you to hold tight for a couple more minutes. Shreya, go ahead.
Sure.
Just on this on this thread.
I'm so sorry, Juan. I feel like I cut you off there. Thank you so much for your explanation, Brooke. I really appreciate it. I just have one more concern. I was originally supposed to get my PGWP till July, but due to my passport, like it was expiring in May, so they only gave me till May. And now I do want to apply for the PGWP extension, but I keep hearing that people are apparently doing like these dummy applications to get their thingy like extended.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be in that threshold. So I don't know if I should be applying or should I like leave? I'm kind of confused.
Yeah, no. So it brings up a really good question. I would say you're not asking for a dummy application when you legitimately missed out on time on the work permit for which you were eligible. And that is something in various different types of work permits where if the duration of the permit was limited and less than what you qualified for because your passport expired, that IRCC accepts the extension. Now, given the timing, it's interesting, and honestly, I don't have an answer. It's a good point, and I will make note of this and follow up. But what happens, like you're in your case, you're owed an extra 2 months, right? And even if you submit your application now, the IRCC's processing time is longer than 3 months.
Exactly.
Right? But on the other hand, you're not responsible for IRCC's like prolonged processing times. What I'm going to do is I will write to the immigration representative's contact. So as a regulated Canadian immigration consultant, lawyers have it too. We have a general immigration representative mailbox that we can write to seek clarity on matters. I'm going to put this question to them and see what their response is, and then I will share it. I'll share it on socials. I'll do a reel on it, and then we can get clarity there. But
Thank-
I would say it's a genuine application because you truly, I mean, assuming you meet the eligibility and you were eligible for that extra 2 months. I'm making that assumption, right? I don't know your case. I haven't seen your documents, but let's assume it's true that you should have gotten 2 more months. If you submit an application requesting the extra 2 months, in my opinion, that's not a disingenuous application. That's a genuine application, and it would not, to me, I would not categorize that as like a dummy application.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I wasn't aware that I could apply for an extension under PGWP, like passport expiry. So I didn't do it in the past. I
Yeah,
was recently told that that was actually possible.
yeah,
And
and
now
so,
I'm in a dilemma of like whether I
yeah,
would be like, I hope I'm not cheating the system. And I'm confused as to whether I should be applying for the extension or whether I should just maybe go back home, try to learn French. Always the possibility. I also had one more confusion. It's regarding the application process in itself. It says that you must apply on paper, but if I apply it on paper, I might not get the confirmation that I'm on implied status, and I don't know if I can
it-
show it to my employer.
yeah. So when you apply on paper, which is required in some cases, I can't remember off the top of my head if it's required like in this particular case. But when you apply on paper, just keep copy of the complete application package, the fee payment receipt, and make sure you send it tracked mail. I would suggest UPS or FedEx. And then keep the copy of the delivery confirmation, making sure it's delivered before your current permit expires. And that's your proof. Like before IRCC went digital, that's what we had for proof of maintained status. And so you can share that with your employer. They might be looking for the online, like the letter from IRCC that they would issue if you applied online. But there are circumstances where you have to make the application for work permit extension on paper. And in those cases, your proof that the proof that you have maintained status is all the like copy of the application, proof you paid the fee, and evidence that the application was delivered before your first permit expired.
All right, thank you so much. That would be all from me. I really appreciate the
Awesome.
information.
And I'm sure this is helpful for many others. So thank you for the questions. Okay, Juan, you have been so patient. Please, if you want to come off mute, you can go ahead with the question.
Sure. My question is basically if the self-employed persons program, is it going to be reinstated this year, later this year, or anything anytime?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I do remember your question coming through. I wonder if you maybe registered for the previous one, and that's where I saw your question. But anyway, happy to address that. Entrepreneurs and immigration, like that intersection is like near and dear to my heart. I love it. And so I'm happy to talk about this topic. I don't think we're going to see the self-employed class come back this year.
Okay.
I know that IRCC, like we are expecting IRCC to share details of a new federal business class. And I don't know if it's actually going to be like a net new, brand new, or if it's going to be an evolution of the startup visa program. That's yet to be determined. But there are other options for certain entrepreneurs. Like if you haven't already, I'd suggest you look into the provincial nominee programs, because most provinces run entrepreneur streams. So that can look different. Does look different province by province in terms of like the company structure, how many employees you need to have, and investment requirements. And aside from that, there are a number of different temporary options, like temporary work permit options for entrepreneurs and self-employed people. So if it's not this year that there's PR, then having in parallel a PR strategy as well as a work permit strategy, like that's super important. I'm telling everyone that's essential at the moment, given the shift in Canadian immigration volumes, and that the recalibration period that we're in. So you could look at depending where you're from. There are investor work permits. There's the C11 entrepreneur work permit. There's significant benefit work permit, which might apply to some people who are self-employed or entrepreneurs if C11 isn't a fit. And then if you're someone who operates a business in another country already, if you're establishing a company with a qualifying relationship, and by that I mean like ownership and control relationship between the two companies, then there are often options that way. So I know that's a little bit kind of different than the question you asked, but hopefully that provides some answers. Was there anything else that you wanted to follow up with that I could help with on that topic?
Well, I mean, I'm from 𝐈𝐦𝐬𝐧, so I'm union. I don't know if there's anything for that. I mean, that's self-employed, but I also do own a business. So, but it's an LLC business, so I don't know. I thought I knew it was 2026 that they were going to reinstate it since after COVID they took it off. So yeah, I've heard of what was C11 you were talking about.
Yeah.
So I've heard of that. But No, that was pretty much it. I was just wondering if they were going to reinstate it or not, but it seems
Yeah.
like they're redoing it completely new, take on
Yeah.
it or something.
I think so. Another thing to consider as well is IRCC introduced new category-based draws for express entry, one of which was the senior manager category. And it requires a year of full-time work as a senior manager in Canada. And IRCC did confirm that it applies to self-employed people. So if for example, somebody that meets all the eligibility criteria of, let's say, the Federal Skilled Worker or Federal Skilled Trades Program, has a business in Canada and operates it in a senior manager capacity, which means the business must be of a size that's large enough it can support a senior manager. Like, you can't be just like the sole employee of the company. You have to have a company that's big enough that the like org structure allows you to direct control and control the company through at least one middle manager. Then there's a path to PR where you have like potentially where you would have a work permit initially, you would launch or continue operating a business in Canada as a senior manager. And then after a year, assuming you meet the eligibility criteria of the Federal Skilled Worker or Federal Skilled Trades Program, then you might have, like, there might be the opportunity to apply for PR through the express entry system if you're invited in the senior manager category.
Okay. Great.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
that's new, like in the past few weeks. When did they announce that? In March sometime, they announced that new category. Maybe it was February. But yeah, so that's another thing to consider. And you said an LLC, so are you, that's in the US?
Yes, I'm in the
Yeah.
US.
Yeah, so then there are options as well, like temporary work permit options that you might consider under CUSMA, intercompany transfer, for example. But that's a temporary solution, so you want to make sure before you act on that or pursue that, like if PR is your goal, making sure that you're aligning any kind of like short and medium term solutions, making sure those align with your long-term goals.
Right. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Tiffany. Sorry,
Hi,
if you pronounce your
it's,
name incorrectly, please correct me.
it's Tiffen. Can you hear
Tiffen.
me?
Yes, I
Yeah.
can.
My question is, I want to apply for French mobility
Mm-hmm.
because I don't have enough like point to apply for PR. I worked for 3 years as a account payable, but it doesn't apply. I don't have any point for PR. And then I am planning to apply for French mobility.
Okay, for the work permit, yeah.
I want to know the job I have to find, how long it should be.
How long it should be?
Yeah, to apply for French mobility because they say you need, I know the job with like should be longer. How long, I don't know.
So under the Francophone Mobility Program, the work permit will be granted for the duration of the employment contract. So it is discretionary, unlike other types of work permits where there's a very defined duration. In the Francophone Mobility, the work permit duration is tied to the length of the employment contract. That being said, I typically don't recommend requesting a work permit any longer than 3 years because a work permit, by virtue of being temporary residence, is just that, it's temporary. And if you start, like if you were to request a duration longer than that, my concern would be that IRCC would, in their assessment of the application, that they would determine you ineligible because you've kind of like crossed a threshold of this isn't really temporary. So my recommendation is a 3-year max duration request. Now, actually somebody else it had a question as well about Francophone mobility. So I'm going to like tag this on too, because it's important. I think it's important and really helpful for a lot of people. It pertains specifically to if a principal applicant's applying for the Francophone mobility, how long does the work permit need to be? And what role do you need to be working in as the principal applicant for your spouse to get an open work permit? So if you are applying in the Francophone mobility program and you're accompanied by your spouse, keep in mind that for Francophone mobility, you can apply for basically any duration. As I said, I wouldn't request more than 3 years in any occupation. But if you have a spouse and you're hoping that they will be eligible for an open work permit based on your Francophone permit, then you want to focus on securing a job in a tier 0 or 1 occupation, or in a tier 2 or 3 occupation that's on the list of occupations that would make your spouse eligible for the open work permit. And you would want to make sure that the duration of the contract and the work permit that you're requesting is at least 16 months, because those are the requirements for spouse open work permits for spouses of skilled workers in Canada.
Okay, no, my husband doesn't. He doesn't want to come to Canada. We are from France, and I'm just staying here because of my daughter. She likes here. She grew up here.
Okay.
That's why I'm trying to apply for PR, because I spent my work permit at the place. I couldn't have any like good knock. I need to extend to have more points.
Yeah, so you can extend the permit for the duration of the contract you have. So if you have an offer of employment, the work permit will be issued for the duration of that employment contract.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions on Francophone mobility? Okay. Does anyone else here have questions? If you do, feel free to just pop your hand up, drop your question in the chat, and happy to address any other questions. Otherwise, I'll jump into some of the other questions that were submitted by registrants who weren't able to make it. Okay, I'll jump into the other questions. If a question comes to mind in the meantime, I'm watching here, just pop up your hand, come off mute, drop your question in the chat, and I'll address it. So I think this question is really great. It says, my PR application was rejected because the employment confirmation wasn't received from my previous employer. Should I remove them to apply? And that's really common. So I'm assuming that this person applied through Express Entry. And what we're noticing is this trend of IRCC refusing applications submitted in Express Entry due to insufficient supporting documents around employment. So when you are applying in Express Entry, you create your profile and it asks for your work history. And that's you need to include the work history that demonstrates you are eligible under one of the programs managed by Express Entry. Okay, either CEC, the Canadian Experience Class, Federal Skilled Worker, Federal Skilled Trades. You also need to include any other work experience, whether it's in Canada or abroad, for which you will be awarded CRS score points. Because when you create your profile, you self-declare your work experience, and the profile, when you submit that information, the system checks, do you qualify? Do you have the work experience to be eligible to apply for PR? And what work experience do you have that we're going to award points for? All other work experience can just wait. You don't have to include it in your express entry profile. And in doing that, when you get the invitation to apply, you will only be prompted to provide proof of the work experience that you put in your express entry profile. And the rest of the work experience goes in your personal history section when you get the invitation to apply. Okay. So in this case, when the person's, there's a couple things. When the person's reapplying, they're going to create a new express entry profile. If they can exclude that period of employment and still qualify for PR and still have enough points to get the invitation to apply without considering that period of employment, absolutely don't include it. That way the system is evaluating your eligibility and it's assigning CRS score based on the work experience for which you can actually get proof. But if that work experience, like if you remove that work experience and it's going to reduce your express entry rank, like your CRS score, or it's going to render you ineligible to apply, then we have to take a different approach because you need that. Like in some cases, people can't just take out the work experience because it would mean they can't proceed with their application. So in that case, I would say, typically IRCC expects that you submit an employment verification letter, just confirmation of your period of employment. But when you cannot get that, my suggestion would be to show proof of best efforts to get it. So like emails to the company and attempts to secure that company documentation and proof of your employment. And then to prepare a statutory declaration confirming you've taken all the effort to get this letter and that the employer is not being supportive or is unreachable, whatever the case may be, and include that declaration with the proof of best effort. And on top of that, I would include everything that I have, like the original job contract, if you had a job description, if you ever got a promotion and there was like documentation around it, or proof of pay, your payroll and employment income, I would include that as well. And I would put every other piece of documentation that I could possibly get my hands on to prove that I actually genuinely possess the work experience. I would do everything I can. Sometimes I could even include going to, a manager within the company or someone who supervised you or even a peer and getting them to provide a statutory declaration. The sky's the limit in terms of what's possible. Whether or not IRCC is going to be willing to accept it is something that's outside my control and your control. But if your success hinges on including this, I wouldn't stop at my employer won't provide the letter. I would say let's get everything we can, show IRCC proof of our best effort to get the documentation that they require, and give it our best shot. The other approach, as I said first, is if it's not going to impact your eligibility and you're still going to have enough points to get into invitation to apply without this period of employment, then absolutely take it out of your profile, and just make sure it is included in your personal history. So once you get the invitation to apply, you'll see in your application, there's a work history section and a personal history section. Personal history is where everything needs to go in the past 10 years, work, study, volunteer, travel, travel only if it's like the only thing you were doing at that time. And then the work history section is just the periods of employment that render you eligible and for which you got express entry CRS points. If anyone has questions as I'm answering these questions, like question to the question, feel free to just jump off mute. Happy to have that informal open session. Otherwise I'll keep going. I'm just checking here. Okay, ooh, this is another good one. So someone else is asking, they're unsure about knock codes. And in particular, this person is referring to a chef and a cook. And they're asking if the employer writes a letter specifying the duties and includes leadership and other responsibilities, could I change knock to chef from cook? So this is a super nuanced question. So I'm just going to take a sip of water. As you can see, I get really like passionate about these topics and I could talk forever about them. So this is a really nuanced question because maybe is the answer. It depends on a number of things. Like, for example, if you have an employer and an occupation specific work permit, let's say it's Francophone work permit, or it's a LMIA work permit or something like that, and it says that you've worked as a cook, it doesn't matter what your employer writes in a letter. It's not going to convince IRCC that you were a chef because you were only authorized to work as a cook. And so that actually, not only is it not possible in that scenario, but it actually opens you up to a significant amount of risk, because if you have a work permit that says you're authorized to work as a cook, and then you have a letter that says you were working as a chef, now you've contravened the conditions of your stay in Canada. So that's one consideration. On the other hand, if you have an open work permit and let's say you were initially employed as a cook, but as employment goes, if you, your role evolved over time and you found yourself actually genuinely taking on additional responsibilities and duties that align with another knock code, then it's absolutely reasonable to claim that experience as a chef. So what it comes down to when you're selecting knock codes, when you're on the knock website and you're looking at an occupation description, Tiffany, I see your hand. I'll jump to you in a sec. When you're deciding on the knock, you're looking at an occupation's description on the knock website. You'll see that first paragraph, it's the lead statement. That needs to be true. By and large, that needs to be true. When you read it, if you're like, that doesn't apply to my job or the circumstances of my employment, then you should probably look for a different knock code. But if you're like, yeah, more or less, that's applicable, that accurately represents my employment, then you can move on to the next section is the example titles. This is not an exhaustive list, but it just gives you a sense of like some of the occupations that IRCC deems to like fall within that category, that knock code. And then the next section is the main duties. And that lists the main duties, what IRCC expects you to be doing. And so if you can confidently say that you performed majority of the main duties, so that would be 51% minimum, and that can be supported by an employer letter, then yeah, it's possible that you can prove you were working in a different knock than potentially what you started out as. But generally that's my approach to how to choose a knock, is start with lead statement, scan the list of example titles, and then really go if you have a job description, go line by line and match up your duties with the duties in the knock description, the main duties, and see how many of them line up. And if there's at least if your duties represent at least 51% of the duties that are listed in the knock code, because you have to prove that majority of the time you're performing the majority of the duties in the knock code. And then wage and qualifications also factor in. Like if your wage is completely off base with what the median is for that knock, that's a red flag for IRCC. Or if your qualifications are like completely not aligned with what the NOC says, that's a red flag. Not a deal breaker, but a red flag. And so you'd have to be able to explain, okay, you know, this is why I'm qualified, or, you know, even though the wage is way out of line with what Job Bank says, I was genuinely in this role, and show proof to back it up, like, you know, comp structure of the company and how it fits within that, if it's, you know, not super aligned with more general data. So Tiffany, yes, please go ahead.
Hello, yeah. My question is, when you apply for PR and you have a job, your work permit is done, but you're already in the pool. You're already in. Can you keep working, or you need to quit the job?
You have to always have authorization to work in Canada. So it depends where you're at in this stage. If you have a work permit, you get invited to apply for PR, you submit the PR application and apply for a bridging open work permit all before your existing work permit expires, then you can keep working. But if you're in the express entry pool and you haven't got an invitation to apply and your work permit's going to expire, being in the express entry pool alone doesn't give you authorization to keep working. So you would have to address the work permit matter separate of your express entry profile. So that would be looking at other looking at options for work permits and then applying for an to extend your stay in Canada and your authorization to work based on a work permit for which you're eligible.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And to that point, I will add as well, just going back to one of the first questions about the dummy application. I think it's really important. It's actually been coming up a lot in consultations I've been holding, and I know there's a lot of discussion around it. Is there are a lot of people who are facing work permit expiries this year, and for some, PRs more in reach than others. And I think it's really important for everyone to be aware of like what their PR options are and to be taking every step you can that's in your control to move closer to that goal. At the same time, recognizing, and I'm sure like everyone's very well aware of the immigration climate right now and the reduction in permanent residency levels, in temporary resident levels. So having, you know, being prepared for a little bit longer journey than, let's say, people who went through it in, you know, pre-2024. And so having a work permit strategy in place in parallel with your PR strategy. And being prepared to apply to extend your stay. And that doesn't, I would highly advise against, and I absolutely not recommend submitting a dummy application. So that's an application where you just like go through the motions of applying to extend your work permit, but like there's no merit to it. I mean, professionally, I cannot recommend it, but also it's disadvantageous to you as the applicant, because it's going to get refused. So now you have a refusal that you have to declare on all future applications. Not that that necessarily is going to present a problem, but it's better to avoid. But also, IRCC continues to evolve its technology strategy, and we've witnessed these bogus applications or dummy applications get picked up and scanned quickly and then refused quickly. So when you're doing it to try and buy time, it's actually counterproductive to just submit a dummy application, because then you miss the window to actually submit an application that's rooted in you know, a genuine request. because the screening processes that IRCC has in place are becoming more sophisticated, so they can pick up on an application like when it's lacking sufficient supporting documents. They can do that pretty quickly. So I would suggest the way that I look at figuring out what work permit options might be available is I start with all of the LMIA exempt work permits, and I go through every single one of them and see, is this a possibility? Ones that we're using more and more frequently are the C10, the significant benefit, the reciprocal employment, especially, for example, this week I spoke with someone, and it might be possible because they work with a big hotel chain. And if there's an internal HR, like global mobility strategy that facilitates opportunities for Canadians to work abroad within the organization, then that could be an option. You know, we do the coach work permits. We do lots of intercompany transfers, or people coming from countries with free trade agreements with Canada, you know, US, Mexico, EU, UK, Chile. There are often mechanisms that allow certain professionals from those countries who have work opportunities in Canada to secure work permits. So I go through all of those options. There are lots of them, and I try and find a solution there. And if I can't, then I look at the feasibility of an LMIA, a labor market impact assessment. And the reason I leave labor market impact assessment to later is because it's a much more burdensome process. It's more expensive. You know, there's quite a lot of resistance from Canadian employers to do it, just because it is such a huge undertaking. It's incredibly costly and time consuming. That being said, we do a lot of them because there are just employers that cannot source talent within the Canadian labor market to fill certain roles. And it's often like industry and location specific that we use the LMIAs a lot, like in construction and hospitality. So but I always try, my approach is always, what's the easiest, fastest, most cost-effective way to achieve the goal? That's where I start, and I work backwards from there. And you will find in Navio HQ, you will find kind of like a decision matrix that will take you to the best we could. I tried to distill my approach and the way that I think about these things into a questionnaire that will lead you through it. So I have one for work permits and I have one for PR. You can find that in Navio HQ and kind of work through that. Again, that's at like the opportunity scan stage of, you know, what might be possible. So that's in Navio HQ, free for you to use. But also just wanted to share kind of how I approach that, so that I'm, you know, I don't submit any dummy applications. I know that, you know, people still do. But I wouldn't do it for those reasons. And as a last resort, I would use C10 significant benefit and route the like the work permit application in that. Okay. I'm just scanning the questions. We're also down to the last 5 minutes. So if anyone has any last questions, please feel free, come off mute, and let's address any other loose ends before we wrap up.
Hi, I have a question for you.
Hi, yeah, absolutely.
Do you run this on a weekly basis, or is it just a one-off just for today?
It's bi-weekly.
Bi-weekly, okay.
Yeah.
So is it like different topics that you cover every time, or is it
No.
like
This is new. We're just getting these up and running, and what the approach we're taking right now is you can submit questions ahead of time and I'll address those first, and then just open it up to whoever is here. If there gets to be a point where like these become super popular with lots of attendees, we might have to start segmenting them by topic so that, you know, you can pick and choose which one you attend so that you get the most value out of it. But for right now, it's pretty open. I mean, I will give you an example of something we won't talk about is someone asked about the Ukrainian immigration programs. And that's an area that I just don't specialize in. And I'm not going to, you know, attempt to pretend that I know things that I don't. So, you know, I won't talk about those things, but I can make a referral to someone that does work in that space. But otherwise, it's pretty open floor in terms of topic.
Okay, great. Thank you. And just a follow-up, how do you go about submitting questions then? Because I think before you were gonna submit it through the registration, but for like the following week.
Yeah, so you can register, like every week there's a registration. So when
Also,
you,
we have to do it every
yeah,
week. Okay, okay.
yeah. And like you can still attend, it's the same link every time. So if you don't register, it's the same link. But if you register and for like an upcoming session, that's where you'll be prompted to submit a question.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Did you have a topic in mind or a specific question?
No, I think I'm actually gonna go back to my team and maybe like brainstorm on some of the issues that we've come across in the past, and maybe ask you form questions on maybe how to address those things. So that's what I was wondering. Maybe for the following session, I think we'll definitely have questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm
Yeah,
happy
thank
to help. Okay, cool.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
Sorry, I just want
Yeah.
to know how to book. I want to book an appointment one-on-one.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So I will follow up to this session. I have your contact because you've registered. I'll follow up and there will have details in that email of how we can connect one-on-one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure. Well, thank you all for being here today. As I just said, I run these bi-weekly, so you know, feel free to come again. Please, my biggest ask, if this was valuable for you, again, in the email I send afterwards, there is a link if you want to leave a review just about your experience. I would super appreciate it. And if it's not a review, tell your friends, tell anyone that could use the support. We know it's been a bit of a volatile time in Canadian immigration, and we just want to be available so people know that, you know, even if you don't end up hiring a paid service, we want to support the people who, you know, are choosing Canada. So we have lots of free tools and supports out there, this being one of them. Navio HQ with all of the tools in there, and our YouTube channel where I'm like breaking things down and walking you through step by step how to prepare and submit applications. So please share the word. Word of mouth and referral goes a long way, and I am super grateful for anyone you know, who shares our details. So thank you so much. And follow-up will come after this call. Hope to chat with you all again, maybe see you another AMA or on one-on-one. We're here to support you, whatever that might look like. So with that,
Brooke, sorry, one quick
yeah,
question.
sorry.
Are you guys located in Edmonton or are you in BC?
We are in BC, but we're
Okay, so it'll be
sorry, go ahead.
so it'll be virtual down here. Okay.
Yeah, they will. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I'll connect with everyone afterwards. And like I said, at the moment, these sessions are like, there's not a particular topic, but we are, as it evolves, it might change in format. We might, you know, do sessions with particular organizations, things like that. I'm open to whatever that looks like. So just stay tuned for how things evolve.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Have a
you.
good afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are. Thank you for spending the last hour with me. I really appreciate it. And I hope to stay in touch with all of you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.